Okay, so we are continuing with our study of Daf Yomi. We are now on Daf Chav Gimel Mud Aleph. Yesterday we read the Mishnah, and now we're going to have the Gemara is going to discuss when exactly positive road applies to which bodies of water. So Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Halach Rav Yehuda ben Bava. Halach like Rav Yehuda ben Bava. So Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Who's supposed to be wrote? Ela be'er mayim chaim bilvad. So similarly, we have another statement of Rav Yosef, Rav Yehuda, the name of Shmuel, that possibly road is only allowed for a freshwater spring well, and that's it. But why do we need both of these things? The Iyashmi'ina and Halacha Rav Yehuda ben Bava, Havamina Derabim Bafilu Mechonasin. We need both. Because if we said Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, you may have thought that only thing that matters is that it belongs to the public. And even if it's collected water, i.e., water from cistern, and that's why it is what it says a public well. To exclude Rabbi Akiva's opinion, who thinks that it's for any well. So it's not necessarily has to be a be'er rabim. The point is that it has to be a well of spring water. That's the main point. And if we only spoke about a be'er mayim chayim, havamina loshna rabim loshna yachin. If it said only be'er mayim chayim, freshwater spring, you may have thought that it's owned, that it doesn't matter whether it's owned by an individual or by everybody. Kamash blood, bava, that possibly wrote is only meant to be used for a public well, not for a privately owned well. Okay, next Mishnah. Manitin v'odamar b'yod b'bava hagina v'karpav shehem shivim ama v'shirayim al shivim ama v'shirayim amukavok geder gavoa asar tvachim patlim v'nocha v'vad shehebash shomera or Beit dira or shteis muchala'ir. So we have also said in regards to a garden or a karpaf, which we were explaining as being in a closed courtyard used for storage. If it is, assuming that it is not reached above the area of its time, meaning that it was 70 and a remainder and 70 and a little, for a grand total of 500 squared amot, and it has a wall around it that's 10 tvachim high, you may carry inside of it. And this is considered to be a private domain, but this only works if it either has a shomerah, which has a little watchman house we said before, or Beit Dir, or some other form of residence where somebody could possibly seemingly live, or that has to be close enough to the city. Therefore, it's treated as if it's his dwelling because of the way that he uses it in relation to his house. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Afilu ein ba ela bor v'seach ma'arav d'altim tocha. So Rabbi Yehuda says, actually, you need even less than that. So he says, here, let me share the photos, everybody. So the question is, what do you need? So before we're saying it needs to have some residential area, but now we're saying all it needs to have is one of these types of water storages. Right, any of these are sufficient, right? So the one we're used to talking about is the standard cistern, which is the bar, right? But there also is there's an elongated water ditch. That's the siach, and the ma'ara is simply a cave containing water. All those are also sufficient. And Rabbi Kiva Omer, I feel ein ba achat mikol elu b'tatli. So Rabbi Q says, no, those don't actually matter. What really matters, not those pictures that we had of different types of water sources, but what actually matters is the size. We don't really care for the fact that it has water source in it or not. The main point is that it is less than the 70 and a little by 70 and a little. So Rabbi Elazar Omer, im ha'ita or ka yiter arachba afil amachat im daltim nocha. Rabbi Elazar, as we have mentioned already, says that if it is longer than it is wide, even by one amma, you can't carry because he requires that it be square. Rabbi Yossi Omer, afil or ka pishnaim arachba daltim nocha. But Rabbi Yossi says it doesn't matter if it's whether or not it's square or rectangular. The main point is that it doesn't have too large of a surface area. Amar Rabbi Elai, Shemai Rabbi Elazar, Bafilu Hika Beit Kor. I heard from Rabbi Elai that you weren't permitted to carry in the karpaf, even if it is larger than a Beit Kor. So a Beit Kor is roughly 30 times larger than that of Beit Sa'av, what we've been dealing with until now. So that's a strange statement from Rabbi Elazar. And then another statement. I also heard from him that in a case where one person in the, let's say there's multiple houses surrounding a chatzer, one of them forgot to join to contribute towards the Eruv. Normally the way they used to do Eruvin is not how we do now, where we have somebody who steps up on behalf of everybody in advance. What used to be done is they would go around in Erev Shabbos collecting. Everybody would contribute their portion of the Erev food, of the bread and Erev Shabbat. And so somebody forgot to contribute their bread this week. So then they're not considered part of the Eruv, and therefore his house is forbidden, and he can't carry anything from the Chatzer into his house. But everybody else is mutar. Everybody else is still allowed to use the Chatzer, even though they can't use his. Right, so we would say that it does not, even to the other person's courtyard. Right, so we say that the rest of the area is still fine. Right, sorry, they can't access his, but they can access the general area, which is surprising because normally we would say they're all things that we're going to get to. They're all things that that go against what we normally would think. I also heard that one may fulfill the obligation for maror with our kablin, which is a type of bitter herb. And then I went afterwards and I asked all the students, I remember hearing this, have you ever heard this? And they all said, no. Right? You find one family who agreed with them, nobody did. So, now the Gemara. So now we're going to start to discuss things stated in this Mishnah. So, my Tana, so why does this, so why are we starting with the Ode? What is this whole Mishnah being appended to when we say the Ode on Rabbi Elazar, right? So, Ilam Mishum Tana Lechada Lechumra Vuktani Akrita Jumhachi Takatani V'Od. Did you want to say because first he taught the Chumra of we talk about Best V'Ro, and now he's adding another stringency. And that's why it says V'Od. V'Ha Rabbi Yehuda Tana Lechada Lechumra Vuktani Akriti V'Lo Vuktani Le'Od. But it doesn't say that for Rabbi Yehuda, who also says a chumra, not a chumra. Yet it always says v'od for Rabbi Elazar, not for sorry, for Rabbi Yehuda it says it, but it doesn't say it. Right, it only says it for. Right, so why are we saying v'od for Rabbi Yehuda's opinion? Shouldn't we say is that really accurate? Like why is only Rabbi Yehuda getting v'od? Why don't anybody else listed in our mission? A whole bunch of people being listed who mentioned the previous mission as well. So why only him? So hatam of zakua banan halakha banan. Why? It's because the cases are actually different. In the previous case, the Chachamim interrupted Rabbi Yehuda's statement and said that he's not incorrect. Therefore, but here the reason why it doesn't right because Rabbi Yehuda's statement in the previous Mishnah, and twice in this Mishnah. Why is only one v'od? So we said that the v'od was only listed when he was interrupted. But when he was uninterrupted, then he continued. Then there's no v'od.
Rabbi, I'm getting a little confused. We're saying the question is why is it used v'od for Rabbi Yehuda then Baba, but not for Rabbi Yehuda?
No, then they're both. It's both for Rabbi. Here, let's look back at the Mishnah. It's for both Rabbi Yehuda and Baba, right? So we have v'od of Rabbi Yehuda and Baba. So the subject is this review. So there's review was mentioned in the previous Mishnah on the bottom of Chavez and Beis. He also mentioned here on Gimel Amud Aleph, and he's also quoted again. When we say Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah again, it's also Rabbi Yehuda.
Ben Baba.
They're all the same Rabbi Yehuda. We're not switching it into anybody else. None of the Rabbi Yehudas. But the question is, why are we busy switching back? And why are we saying va'od sometimes and not other times? Like, what's that word va'od serving to do?
Okay.
So we're stating that va'od is to say when he's going back to what he was saying before, and when he was interrupted by the Rabbanan in the middle of his statement. But when he has two consecutive statements, he doesn't need to say the word va'od because he doesn't need to go back and return to what he's saying prior. So hatam. Oh, sorry. Do we really say that whenever he's uninterrupted, whenever he is interrupted by the Rabbanan, we always say the word va'od, the next to Eruvin Baba? But right? So we said this should apply to every Tana. So what about happens with Rabbi Eliezer in Sukkah? Just a Rabbanan l'ktani od. So then what about the case that happened in Sukkah with Rabbi Eliezer then? Right, where there was interrupted, then it says the od. So hatam milte hudav sukkah. There, it's not the same because there, when they argued Rabbi Eliezer there, they were agreeing with it. Right? Hachav milte achritav sukkah. Now the question of whether or not the break serves reason to add the od or not add the od is based on whether or not they did a full, how much of an interruption it was. So if it's in the same, if it's in the same vein, we say, oh, we're saying, oh, well, on the previous topic, let's add this. But if it's something, if the break is too strong because the Rabbanan brought an entirely different topic, then we would not be using the word va'od because that doesn't continue, not a continuation. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Afil Ema. Okay, now we're continuing on with the statement of Rabbi Akiva about what is actually truly required. So Rabbi Akiva Omer, Afil Ema Echad Mikol Elam Atal Talim B'Docha. Rabbi Akiva says, even if there's only one, even if there isn't any of the sources of water, as long as the size isn't too large, you have a wall, you can still carry in the enclosure. Rabbi Akiva had a Tanakama, that it seems like Rabbi Akiva has the same exact opinion as Tanakama. So then what? So what do you mean? Like 70 and a little, 70 and a little for both of them, right? So isn't that the same thing? So now there is a difference. And so what is this small difference? Titania, so here you find out. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Davar Mu'at Yesh Al Shivim Ama V'Shirayim Lo Natnu Chaim Bo Shiur. So there's actually, Rabbi Yehuda says there's a tiny amount that actually is a little bit more than the 70 and remains they're talking about, and the Chacham didn't give an exact measurement. So, Chachamim Shiur Satayim Kachatzar Mishkan. So, and wait, so how do we get to the measurement of a Beit Satayim? So it's based on the surface area enclosed by the Chatzar Mishkan, by the courtyard of the Beit Mikdash, right? Which is 50 by 100, and when you turn that into a square, you end up getting 70 2/3 and 70 2/3. You're actually still short a little bit because when you're multiplying by thirds, it doesn't quite work out either. Right, so that's the extra little bit. So
that explains the difference between Rabbi Akiva and the Tanakama?
Yes, well, there's 70 2/3 precisely.
Who said it precisely?
Yeah. It's the 70 2/3, and that's exactly it. Or do we say that the point is that there'll be a total area of 500 amma? Which one is it? Because they're not the same measurement. There's like a infinitesimally small difference. So Manahani Mili. So now we're trying to figure out how do we figure this out? How do we get to the point of the area of the Mishkan being the Chatzar being 70 and 2/3 and 70 2/3. So now we're going to explain it. So Amar Yehuda Damar Kra. Orech Chatzar Mea B'Ama V'Rocha 50 Ba'al 50. Okay, so the pasuk says the length of the Chatzar is 100 amot, and its width is 50 by 50. So, right. So now we're trying to figure out what that means. So Amar Torah Tol 50 Zabev 50. So if you take the square of 50 cubits by 50 cubits and surround it with the remaining 50 cubits until you form a square, and then that square and then each side of that square will be measuring 70 cubits and a remainder. Okay, so now we're going to ask, Shata Dekram, the Ma'aktiv. Wait, but so we understand that that's where you're darshing out of the pasuk. How do you explain the pasuk itself? Like, is it if it's 50 by if it's 100 by 50 by 50, that sounds off. It shouldn't be 100 by 50. What's the 50 by 50 thing going on there? So, Amar Abai, Hamed Mishkan Osvat Chamishim, Kedei Sheher Chamishim Amal Fanav, Vesprim Ama L'Chol Ruach Ruach. Rather, why do we say that? Because we know that the Mishkan itself was 30. Was in order to have there being a gap of 20 between the edge of the edge of the Chatzer and the other parts of the Mikdash, meaning that since the whole courtyard is 150 in total, right? Since it's 100 by 50, so that means that the placement of the Mishkan itself was at the edge of 50 cubits, so that way there's a space 50 in front of it, and then there's a space of 20 on each of the sides of the Mishkan. So do we have a diagram of that? Okay, so yes, we do. So let me share that one moment. Here we go. So when we say here, we say that Tol Chamishim, it means that you were dealing with the area you're referring to is 50 by 50. So we get to this, that's the square. That's what they meant by Chamishim. It's saying there will be an area unenclosed by the where the as opposed to where the Kodesh of the Mishkan is. There's also the 50 by 50 area to the south. That'll be this big. And right, and Rashi says, so the question is, so how did you do it? By Rashi Durmatil Allah. That here's this we're not quite at that one yet. Okay. So we'll get back to that in just a moment. So let's keep reading a little bit. Does it? Okay, so I'll stop the share for now. Let's go back to the Gemara. So, right. So basically, we found out that the reason for all those measurements was to tell you exactly where the Mikdash was placed relative to the rest of the courtyard and how much empty space should be surrounding it. And that's why the Lashon is what Lashon is, and that's how it makes sense in the context of the building of Mishkan, not just to teach us the dinim about about how big a Beit is. So Rabbi Elazar, Omer, Imata Arkaya, Yitzhak, Filama, so basically saying there has to be a square, Rabbi Elazar. So Hatanya, Rabbi Elazar, Omer, Im Haita Arkaya Ter Al Pishnaim Barach Ba Filamacha, Em Tatlim Tocha. Wait, but there's another Beit that says if its length is more than double its breadth, even more than by one amma, then you can't carry inside of it. So that would imply that that's saying that actually you could have a rectangle as long as it's not 2 times as long as it is wide. So Amar Rabibi Barabaye Ki Tanan Nami Magnitin. So no, we learned in the Mishnah that Yeter al Pi Shnai Barach Batzanan. It says also talks about a case of more than 2, but Ihagan and Rabbi Yossi. But then wait, but in our Mishnah, the one who allows it to be twice as long as it is wide, that's Rabbi Yossi. That's not Rabbi Eliezer. So Ikibenayu Ribua to Ribua Rabbanan. Rather, what's the difference between them is whether or not you the square, the Rabbanan squared. Meaning the Chachamim basically we're calculating the squares based on the diagonal. So that's how you could wind according to so the question is, how big is the diagonal relative to the rest of the space? So according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, if the diagonal is more than double that of the width, then that's a problem. So they're not talking about the total side being double, but the hypotenuse, right? The diagonal. So therefore, it's a difference of a rather large. The difference of basically of root 2, of 1.414 bar between them. So then because of so the difference isn't quite as large as you'd think, and that's what he's stating. He's not stating that it has to be absolutely perfect square. He's stating that they simply can't have the diagonal being more than double one of the lengths of the sides, which really means, let's say again, assuming you have a if you're dealing with, let's say, a perfect square, let's say for a perfect square, right? So the diagonal would end up being, let's say if each side is 1, then the diagonal would be 1 root would be root 2 would be the square root of 2, 1.4, approximately 1.414. And then if we so as long as you don't extend the leg until it reaches the point of it being the diagonal ends up being double that of the length, that would mean that the hypotenuse is then 2. So that would be what we'd be, that would be the problem. So it's not as great of a difference as you'd have thought. So we would like me to explain more pictorially. I can, but that's more of a question of a mathematical exercise from high school, which some of us really enjoyed, some of us did not. So we will leave it there. Rabbi Yossi Omer. Right. So in order to talk about Rabbi Yosef's opinion, he says it could be twice as long as it is wide, and it's still fine. So Itmar Amar Rabbi Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Halach Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi Yosef, then Rabbi Yehuda, then Rabbi Shmuel says, like Rabbi Yossi, that it doesn't. That what matters is the total surface area. It does not matter if whether or not it's long and narrow or perfectly square. Rabbi Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel Halach Rabbi Kiva, but Rabbi then Rabbi Yehuda and then Shmuel stating the Halach Rabbi Kiva. So it's like, wait, how does that work? This is how Shmuel saying both statements. It looks like two different people that are arguing with each other. How does that work? So let's explain this. Both of them are actually lakula. With three, so he needs to move them. The EDS can Halach Rabbi Yossi Havamina Ad Ika Shomer Eira or Beitira. Because if you had somebody say it's like a VOC, you may have thought that you're required to have a guard hut or a Beit inside of it. That's why you said Rabbi Akiva to teach that you don't even need to have a residence if the area enclosed by the fence is less than Beit Zatayim. But halach Rabbi Akiva havamina da'arin katin. The Arif Katin low. I feel as though Rabbi Akiva may have thought maybe it's not okay if it's not square. That doesn't matter whether or not that does not need to be a square. So therefore we know that neither do you need to have a true dira inside of this enclosure, nor does it need to be square. So karpaf yoter mi beit zatayim shukaf ladira. So if you had this karpav, which had been used for storage, let's say, and it's more than Beit Satayim, even if you happen to have made it, even if it wasn't closed to the outside for use for residential purposes, once you planted a majority of the area, it becomes like a garden. And now it is prohibited to carry anything within. Okay, so let me is there a diagram of this? Okay. Oh, sorry. They're actually there we go. Let me share some. So before we get into this one, again, I was looking back in Parash Chai. Turns out that I forgot to turn the page, so I missed some of the diagrams. So I'm just going to show them to you. So we said that 50 in the middle and then on the sides. Here's a pictorial representation of that, of how you have the 20 and the 20 on all the sides of it. And then as far as the placement of the kodesh relative to the rest of the chatzer, so you see here with the 20 being below, okay, and 20 being on the side. That's okay in the middle of the 50. And then we're dealing with the here. Then this is where Tosfos are going to help you out with the math of the how to calculating the diagonals. So, and now we're down in picture number 65 with the planting of, it was in the large yard. So you may notice this looks very similar to many people's homes with their backyard, where you have, let's say, let's say if you happen to, again, in most suburbia, you tend to not have this large of a yard, but is in at least in modern day. But back in the day, it used to be very common, but used to have a very common to have large yards. You'd also often use them for as your fields as well. So this is saying, originally you had it simply being a nice yard where you'd use as part of your house and you use it for storage, and then you decided, I'm going to turn it into a agricultural field now. So what happens to the status of that karpov that used to be used for storage? Now we're switching it over to being used as a place to grow crops. So we say this is considered to be a garden, and therefore it's prohibited to carry in it because it's not considered to be part of your house. And once it's not part of your house, then you've got a problem. Then there's problems carrying with it until you've made it an area that's permissible again. So, right. So that's only if you So that's if you have planted it with seeds, with seed crops. Then it's a problem because it's a garden, but not to rubo. But if you nata means planting trees, the majority of it. But if you planted the majority of the trees, that would be fine because that does not negate the fact that you're meant to use this whole area for a place where you live. So look at this photo, right? So if you decided to plant an orchard in your backyard, it would not lead to any local problems. But if you wanted to plant a wheat field or a vegetable garden, it essentially could lead to problems. Okay, so now we're gonna analyze that statement. So Nizra Rubo, planted majority of it. Amar Ravuna Braid Rav Yoshua, Lo Amran Ella Yoter Beit Time, Val Beit Time Mutar. So we're talking about the case where you see it and it's problematic. That's only a case where the original karpaf was more than Beit Sataya. But right, but then if I'm sorry, that doesn't resonate that time. But if it is no more than a bait, then to bait style total amount that you planted, then it should be fine. So now I'm trying to figure out who's this like. Come on.
You're breaking up. I don't know if it's just me.
Breaking up.
Oh, okay. 1 second. I'm not sure what happened there. 1 moment.
Oh, he's breaking up.
You froze, Rabbi. I don't know whether you're aware, and you're still not clear.
Okay, 1 moment.
Close the.
Okay, can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, I don't know what happened there, but maybe because I was sharing and then okay. So let's okay. So I'm going to review from what I said a little prior, just make sure that we didn't miss anything. So we were talking about planting majority or a minority of your courtyard, of your karpaf, which is again we should say was an area that wasn't really just defined. That was debatable whether or not it would be a reshut yachid or not. Depends on your usage, whether you're allowed to carry there or not. So if it's a place where that's because you use it like it's your house. In the Mishnah, we're talking about if you use it like it's your house, then that allows you its usage. If it's a place that's not like your house, as the meaning because it's too far in the city, or if it's too large, then it could create issues. So we're saying now, let's say you had it right next to your home, but now we're saying which normally should have been fine, and you should be able to carry, but now you're doing something to your karpaf that'll create problems. So first we discussed if you planted a majority of it with seeds, right? You decided you want to turn it into a wheat field, or you want to turn it into a cornfield. So if you plant a majority of your karpaf that way, that would create problems, because that would mean that it is now no longer considered to be an area for your usage. Instead, it's a grain field. That's a problem. But
Rabbi, would it matter how big it is? If it's less than the basis sign, then would it be okay?
the Gemara is getting to that. I'm just recapping because I'm not sure at what point I cut out. So
Okay,
yes, you are correct, Joel. Don't worry. So excellent points. So the right. So then we're stating the difference between if you were to have planted it with seeds versus if you had planted it with if you planted it with seeds versus if you planted it with fruit trees. If you planted with fruit trees, we said that it would still be okay. Whereas if you had or other sort of trees, but the problem specifically is with the specific problem is with grain, because once something's used for a grain field, you really can't go back and forth without destroying your whole field. Whereas if you're using it for trees, isn't like you can go back and forth in a vineyard and or any sort of orchard, and you're not going to be ruining everything. So therefore, you can still use it for what you were using it without creating any issues. And that's why it would be more. We would prefer using it in that manner. So then we're talking about the case that let's say, but you wanted to put a garden, let's say a small garden in your yard. That's your yard, which is defined as a karpef or karpaf, and then you wanted to know, did I do this correctly or incorrectly? So, right. So Rav Huna, Breder of Yeshua, says, "Lo amron el yoter BAYT satayim of BAYT satayim mutar." So when we say that the majority of the karpaf is sown with seeds and it's prohibited, that's only in case where the sown section has to be greater than two beitza, i.e. a BAYT satayim. But if it is less than that, then it'll be fine. So it basically depends on how large your yard is. If your yard is roughly let's say is 3 beitza in size, so then that would mean. So then that would mean that what would that roughly be? So meaning the exact dimensions will okay, I'm not going to worry about the exact dimensions of how you get your square field of being 1500, the square root of 1500. Square root of 1500. Second, using the calculator. I apologize. My ability to do square roots in my head has decreased since I was 5,000.
All those years of yeshiva, yes, Rabbi?
Yeah, I mean, it's just more like I haven't had to be doing math in my head. I've been using, as we get more advanced in math, either you lose numbers or you use calculators. Very rarely you actually ever asked to do multiplication, division, etc. in your head anymore. So I've gotten too used to using a device. So that would be that if yours is 122 and roughly 122 and a half, 122 and a half. So that would mean so that means in our term, let's say that means if you had a yard that was right, so that'd be around 60 meters, it's like 61 meters by 61 by around 61, 62 meter wide yard. Let's just go 60 by 60 meters because that's just makes math a little bit easier. Right, so if you have a yard that's 60 by 60 meters, that means that you can plant up that if you did a majority, right, it could still be less than a BAYT time of total area that is planted, and that should be fine. But so if you did majority there, so that your majority, it could be a majority of your yard, yet it will be less than the BAYT time that would make it be problematic. But let's say if you had a very large yard, let's say you had also assuming enclosed by a fence. So if you had a very large enclosed fence, area enclosed by a fence, then let's say you had a yard that was, let's say, 100 meters by 100 meters, which is much bigger than BAYT time, which is several BAYT times. Then that would create that would create that if your majority of your field is covered, that then with seed crops, meaning let's say wheat, barley, spelt out rye, or corn, or anything else that grows and looks like, and as opposed to trees. So it also would probably also apply to most vegetables as well. So any of these things, because these are areas you can't, the ones that are planted, they can't be used. That would create problems. Okay. So come on. So whose opinion is this like? Rabbi Shimon did not, and as Rabbi Shimon says in the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Echa Gagot, Vechel Chatzirot, Vecha Karpefot, Reshut Achat Hem L'Kelim Sheshavtu B'Tochan, V'lo L'Kelim Sheshavtu B'Toch HaBayit. So this works from Rabbi Shimon, who says that roofs, courtyards, and Karpefot are all considered to be one domain in regards to the utensils that are in them, meaning that even if you have many different people store things in this area, since you aren't really living there, you don't need an Eruv, and they can be carried from within these enclosures without any problems. So there's no issue if people having claims because nobody normally uses this area. But below, but they are not said to be one domain if these are utensils that normally began in the house and then later were taken to the karpah, because that would mean that it would be because then you have the issue of there being multiple people having usage of the area in different regards. I suppose in many cases where nobody has control. So from here we're implying that if you have a karpah which has one part that is sown and one part that's unsown, that would mean that it's all considered to be one area and permitted as long as the prohibited section isn't too large. Because it's saying where even though say some people have rights and access to use BAYT on their own items, but here it is insufficient to generate a problem. So Rabbi Shimon, Nami, Kiyodin Israel Rabo, Have Mu'at, Have Miuta. So according to Rabbi Shimon, since the greater part of the karpah is sown, it's then the minor part, Batulele Gabe Ruba, Vahavalei Karpav Yuter Betzatayim Basur. But on the other hand, what's the opinion of everything Rabbi Shimon is like, no, that's not true, because Rabbi Shimon would say that once the majority is like one, then we'd say that could create a problem. My computer is I'm just looking at it. So let me just plug in so I don't cut out in the middle mid sentence here. Sorry about that. Okay, so when we are, so it's the question. So can we view the karpah as separate parts, or do we say that the whole thing?
You're frozen, Rabbi.
Frozen again? Oh, I'm sorry.
We can't hear you.
Okay, 1 second. Hopefully this will fix itself in a moment. Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, that's good.
Okay, so the question was, we're talking about so we say Rabbi Shimon, that's a that doesn't make sense to say that if the majority of it is considered to be sown with seeds, that the whole thing's not, because generally we would say that we follow the majority of the area. So we should say that we should view by the majority. If the majority of it is an usher place to go because it's seeded, that means the whole area should be a place you're not allowed to go, and therefore the whole thing should be asur. So el idmar hachi itmar, rather let's rephrase it in a way that would make so then let's phrase it differently. Rather means that if only rather we should say it's according to the opinion of that only if it was minority of the field was seeded that it'd be mutar. Hamuta shari. Amar v'huna breder of Yeshua lo amran elo delo have betzatayim v'al betzatayim asur. They're saying that if with the minority of the field is planted, and then as long as the minority of the field area is not betzatayim, then that means, let's say you had a small garden in you had a small wheat field in your yard, but a majority of your yard wasn't a wheat field. So then that situation only allows you to carry in the whole karpaf of your karpaf is only allowed if the seeded area with the wheat with the seed crops is less than a BAYT satayim. Okay.
No, I'm trying to understand this. So you're saying that, let's say you have a karpaf that's more than BAYT satayim, but you have part of it that's seeded, and it's less than BAYT satayim, even though the whole karpaf is more than a BAYT satayim, including the seeded area, you'd be allowed to carry there?
No. Let's just take a step back and go through all the cases again, so it'll be a little clearer. Okay, so we started with our here 65. See the courtyard here? Sorry, the karpaf here. It's not a courtyard. It's a karpaf. It's a large yard. Okay, not a chatzer. It's somewhere in between, right? Because it's very large. It's not necessarily always used in the right fashion. Some used for storage and for other things. So everything normally, assuming that you enclose it properly, you can use it, and if you have a full wall around it, it might even be able to be even larger than BAYT satayim. Then we said if you started seeding it majority, right, then that's a problem. Then we stated that it's a problem only if you seeded it, but if you planted trees, that would have been fine. Okay, that was the first stage of the Gemara. Then we started discussing, well, what about if? Then we got the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. There's our opinion here. Rabbi Yehuda Braid, Rabbi Yeshua says it only works. They oteri BAYT satayim about BAYT satayim mutar. Right. So when do we say that the majority being seeded is a problem? So the first time we stated this is only a problem if the seeded area covers the majority, and that majority is a BAYT satayim area. But if your whole
Has to be
yard
both those conditions.
wasn't BAYT satayim, then it would be fine. That was the first time we quoted him. Okay.
What did you do? If what wasn't BAYT satayim, if the unseeded area wasn't BAYT satayim, that's what you just said.
That the first version we had of it stated that if you have a yard of BAYT satayim, majority of which is seeded, right? So the main part is if the field's majority seeded, but the area seeded is less than BAYT satayim,
yep,
that should be allowed. That was what we said initially on Chav Gimel and Beis.
Okay.
Okay, but then we're like, wait, that doesn't make sense. How are we calling it that? Right? Because shouldn't we say that once the majority of the field is planted, you're not allowed to access it, it's called a karpaf. We think that it's an area that you're not allowed to, that it doesn't have access and usage on Shabbos. Then how are we stating that you can still use the other area which isn't seeded? Shouldn't the whole thing be forbidden for usage once the majority of it is forbidden for usage? So then they're like, you're right. Gemara says, right, as we quoted by the case of Rabbi Shimon said that whether you've got gardens or echad gagot, echad chatzirot, echad karpifot, meaning that in regards to if you have things that were left outside, that they can whatever is left outside can be used within that enclosure, which imply again that now it's able to be used. So we're stating that doesn't mean that we don't understand what you're stating then, that if it's but you're not allowed to use it from the house into it. So but here it looks like, or the previous statement, it sounded like you could use from the house into the karpaf, no problem, as long as it wasn't too large. But that's not what's implied by the other statement in the mission of Rabbi Shimon. So instead, what do we say? So when are we allowing you to? We assume you have a very large yard. So when are you allowed to access the area that is seeded, as well as not having it being a problem for the rest of the yard as well? That's only allowed when the area that's seeded is smaller than BAYT satayim. So initially, you're right. So we switched to the middle. Initially, we thought that if you had a majority of your field being seeded, but the area covered is less than Beit Satam, that should be fine. But then based on the other Mishnah, we realized that case is not the case. Rather, it only works if a minority of the field is covered by the seeds, and that minority is less than a Beit Satam. But once you have an area of Beit Satam or more that is seeded, no matter how large your enclosure is, it'll create a problem of ostering the entirety of the enclosure. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay, good.
But so let's say like the field, the minority of the field is seeded, but it's less on the basis sign, then you're allowed to carry in the rest of it.
Correct.
So, but do we care how big the whole enclosure is, including the non-seeded area?
No, as long as the minority is seeded, and that minority is less than Beit Satam, even if the enclosure is much larger, it should be fine, because it's a enclosure that has a residential area in it. So therefore, the upper enclosure of the walls is much larger. Meaning, so in theory, you could have, let's say, even a Beit core, or which is like 30 times as large as a Beit cell. Then you have a really large yard. As long as no area that's seeded is more than a Beit Satam, the whole area would still be allowed to be carried in, assuming you have walls around it.
Oh, so is that the thing, that the seeded area can only be a minority of the whole area because it has to be considered a residential area, and a seeded area is a non-residential?
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent point.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay. So tomorrow, I will not be giving the daf because I will be in transit. Hopefully, Rabbi Kropkin or somebody else will be covering the daf for tomorrow. I will hopefully be posting to Toronto online a recording of myself learning it at some point. In case you happen to miss the live one at 7:30 tomorrow. Again, that can be found on torontotorah.com or on the Toronto Torah's YouTube channel. And that's it for today.
Thank you. Safe travels, Rabbi.
Yeah, have a safe trip.
Safe trip.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing everybody in Toronto.
Likewise.
Okay, thank you.